This episode is brought to you by The Skeptical Buddha, The Tao of Science, my book, which is a thoughtful discourse on Eastern philosophy and how it helped birth ideas required for science and skepticism and the way it fell behind in the face of new evidence. This book discusses the long history of both philosophies as well as the tenets and variations within the varying sects, along with psychology and our own natural biases. It discusses how to counter our natural biases using science and the underlying concepts of meditation and mindfulness, a more complex understanding of how science operates than most of the public understands, and why it is the best tool we have to discover truth and reality, as well as philosophical ideas we might embrace as technology progresses. The material is packaged in a way that the average person can understand, with rich illustrations to draw the reader in and feel at peace. Welcome to After School Democracy, the podcast that attempts to fill in the gaps you almost certainly missed in school about politics, economics, and history. Steampunk, for those of you who don't know, is an artistic, aesthetic, and literary genre that I and many people worldwide have enjoyed over the last decade. It takes the aesthetics of the Victorian and early Georgian era and gives it a retrofuturistic look. Steam, gears, cogs, bustles, top hats, and way too many corsets worn on the outside of one's clothing for some reason make up the images, with brass and a whole lot of questions such as, what if you could make a steam-powered computer that actually worked like a modern computer? Or a Zeppelin that was actually financially viable? What if the laws of physics more closely matched theories at the times, such as the existence of ether or phlogiston, instead of the reality of our world? It also allowed us to live in an alternative timeline where slavery, colonialism, and labor issues were not as much a thing. But because of the imaginary world, it made us all the more likely to dig into the real past at the time and see it for the horrors it really was, often to gain some macabre ideas to twist into our storyline or decor. This is, of course, the opposite of what Civil War reenactors in much of the South do, where they believe in the myths of the lost cause and refuse to look beyond it. Diesel punk of the 20s to the 40s, clockwork punk of the 1700s to early 1800s, and atomic ray gun of the retrofuturism of the 1950s ideas of spacefaring future are all spin-offs of these ideas that may or may not have maintained traction, and I'm sure there are more I'm not listing. However, cyberpunk is one that is the closest to possibly becoming a reality. The Matrix, Ghost in the Shell, Blade Runners, all possible futures. A digital world overlapping with the real world, but always a dystopia, a wrecked planet, a powerful corporation, and our brains being hacked or jacked into the mainframe. Playing cat and mouse, trying to either start a revolution or just hanging on in quiet desperation trying to survive. One step further is apocalypse punk, which, if we hit the 3-degree mark, could be something of a reality. These include, of course, Mad Max and Waterworld. Thankfully, at this point, we are out of the woods for going higher than 3 degrees, 5 degrees being utter extinction, but I don't want to live in a Mad Max hellscape either. However, some began realizing that these futures, while great for acting as warnings, if pushed too far, tend to foster doomerism. So some came together and created solarpunk. Instead of the future taking its logical, current, or worst-case path, let's paint a picture of what it could be. Utopianism is there to create an impossibly perfect world and then see what one could do to get as close to it as possible. The polluters and tech lords want us to give in to doomerism and just give up, or paralyze us with anxiety so we can do nothing. In this world, hope is an act of rebellion. We can talk all day about what we don't want, but if we don't paint a picture of an alternative world, people just think about it as if it's the same as how we live now, only with renewables. This is sadly not possible. The way we live has never been sustainable from day one. Much of it, such as single-family housing-only zoning, has racist roots, as the land parcels had to be split up into large lots, which would ensure minorities couldn't afford to live there. Even today, suburbs that didn't figure out how to get subsidized from the city to build roads with a fraction of the tax density needed to sustain it are in some cases having to rip up their streets and replace them with gravel because it's too expensive to live that spaced out without someone, often poorer than you, subsidizing your roads. One of the biggest things the tech world, especially Elon Musk, has painted the renewable future as is everyone buys an electric car to replace their gas-powered ones. They will then be powered by solar and wind. Everyone gets a power wall of lithium batteries, and you can be self-sustaining. This isn't sustainable either. If all cars were replaced in the US with lithium batteries, the environmental impacts on the planet in terms of massive pollution, not to mention literal slavery in cobalt mines, would be catastrophic. It's estimated America can at best replace 1/4 of its cars with battery-powered ones, which means we need to do more with less. Higher density living, more walkability and bikeability, mass transit like trolleys, trolley buses, and electric trains that use no or small batteries to get to their last mile only, then link back up with a grid to recharge while taking the majority of their trip are examples we've had for over a century, but the resistance is strong against them. People fear and don't want to change, not realizing that making everything suburban and car-centric is a major part of the loneliness epidemic, as we never interact with each other. We just sit for hours in our cars just to get anywhere, including basic errands, something the rest of the world would be appalled to have to do. All homes may well have some form of electric battery in the future, in case the power goes out, though not necessarily lithium batteries. Lithium is perfect for strong bursts needed, in compact size, like a car or an e-bike. Other bulkier batteries are also expensive and create just as many toxins to produce. They also degrade over time, with few good ways to recycle them cleanly. One thing I have to debunk is that lithium batteries don't actually burn for hours. The problem is that most fire departments weren't trained in how to put them out, and where to put the hose. Once you actually get past its casing, you can drown the fire. That said, there are several types of large-scale and car-scale storage batteries that are hopefully going to be cheaper and significantly less destructive on the planet in a video listed below, including sodium-ion, iron-air, and aluminum batteries. This may make a higher amount of cars and home batteries actually sustainable as opposed to the current lithium model, but we have to plan things based on what is sustainable now, and not on what may be possible in the future. However, a new technology solves all of these issues cheaply and cleanly with no degradation over time, and it will make solarpunk a little more steampunk. A Finnish company has produced the first sand battery, and is scaling up production worldwide by the end of this year. The idea is super stupidly simple but genius, and might bring back steam-based appliances in the home. When the grid is going to be overloaded, or renewables make up too much energy at the moment, the energy is dumped or sent into the ground where it dissipates, wasting tons of usable watts yearly. These sand batteries can instead take this excess energy, run it through heating coils, and heat up the interior of the sand battery to around 600 degrees centigrade that can sit for weeks if needed, holding the heat that can be easily and quickly converted into steam. This is basically a giant cooler packed with sand, rejected from industrial uses that people essentially want to get rid of, filled with electrical coils to heat up and piping to tap the energy. The designers claim they can store the same amount of energy for 1/10 the price of a lithium battery, and none of the toxins that come from the current chemical battery. They are literally dirt cheap, using junk sand leftovers that no one wants, and power from the grid that is currently being wasted. Its only drawback is size. It's about 5 to 10 times the size of a lithium battery, so you won't see any sand steam trains happening. However, many universities, industrial hubs, and cities such as New York run most of their utilities on steam already. Radiators, water heaters, washing machines, industrial ovens, hospital autoclaves. Most industries have a steam supply of some form. Throwing a grid of sand batteries into the mix could help these places get green ridiculously fast, and they could save tons of money by buying excess grid power at a steal when there is a really sunny or windy day. On my ship, since the nuclear reactors produced heat, pretty much everything ran off steam, from the dishwashers to the catapults on the flight deck. Though all people on the flight deck will tell you that the modern magnetic ones are better and should be faster for such precision, but for us in our day-to-day lives, don't need to have it so precise. Steam appliances are also much more durable, they have to be with higher pressures and easier to repair, and most often cheaper than electrical appliances. This could give the homes and workplaces a bit of a steampunk flair, that if done well can be used to bring back some of the old aesthetics of the steam past. The Finnish company is working to test this efficiency using either a Peltier, thermocouple, or turbine generator unit to convert its energy into electricity, which loses up to 70 to 80% of its energy, so it's not perfect, though if that's the case it will cost just as much to store electricity as a current lithium battery, but with none of the pollution or degradation. Also, did I mention this is made up of materials and energy that is currently thrown in the garbage as it is, so this reduced efficiency is still better than what we're doing now. Below are links to the project and even a way you can make your own cheap, though non-engineered inefficient sand battery yourself. There is also an article that attempts to debunk the information, but seems to think that energy isn't going to be used in a few days. Yes, it might not be able to store energy for months with that much efficiency, but if used when the grid demanded it, the systems relying on steam draining it within days and not weeks or months, it would be as efficient as they promised. The long-term storage isn't that great, but if it absorbs all the current waste from the grid and puts it into some use for something that is currently created through burning carbon fuels, who cares? Grids unable to stably handle the load without wasting the energy is one of the biggest issues in renewables at the moment, and this is a relatively quick, cheap fix. I think the person is looking at a small scale and not at a large scale at play, and they're pedantically right that it doesn't fit the true definition of a battery. There's also another end to this, that instead of using heat, using cooling ammonia, which is actually a more efficient form of cooling, but not used in many systems because it's toxic in enclosed spaces. With a sand battery, all of it would be outside, so any leaks would vent immediately. Once cooled, using a mix of geothermal to pre-cool it and condensation and evaporation of a usual air conditioner, this sand battery could hold freezing temps and run chill water as needed to act as a form of refrigeration or air conditioning. This may not be as efficient and there may be better options. In the long run, better, cheaper, and less polluting batteries will hopefully be found. Until then, this is something we actually have versus what we would like. It's clean, cheap, many systems already run steam directly, and it would be an essential part of the mix, massively reducing the waste we currently have in the system, which will possibly create a new neo-steampunk, solarpunk aesthetic.
So as always, thank you all for watching this as a video or listening to this as a podcast, which I'm sure was completely uncontroversial to anyone, especially to the YouTube monetization team. So if you found this useful, please donate to my Patreon. Just a reminder that I'm Anubis2814 on YouTube, and I have almost 700 videos on my channel that I've made over the past 11 years on religion, science, psychology, and politics. Please go check them out, and if your site has the option, like, rate, review, and comment. A special thanks goes out to Kendall Copperberg, Mylon Mia, Ogrel, Elias Garcia Guevara, and Joe Taylor for their $10 or more Wapawet level donations. I'm always humbled by the fact that they find my work worth funding and worth driving me forward. Thank you all. Please consider donating to my work if you can, and thank you all for listening.